Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Saisha Grayson, curator of time-based media at at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. It is my honor to welcome all of you and our distinguished guest speakers, John Hanhart and Greg Zinman, to this cyberspace celebration of the extraordinary artist Nam June Paik. Before we commence, I want each of us to take a moment to consider where we are zooming in from and gratefully acknowledge the vibrant and diverse Native peoples on whose homelands we each live, work, and take shelter during COVID-19, recognizing that the pandemic is disproportionately devastating Indigenous as well as Black and Latinx communities. For today, I recognize where I am, the unceded territories of the Haudenosaunee peoples, where I am an uninvited guest, as well as the Lenni Lenape and the Piscataway peoples, where the Smithsonian Institute is located. It is also important for us to express gratitude and recognition to the people who are enslaved in constructing the historic building that houses our institution. And extending from that, I acknowledge today's strike for Black Lives, which was called after this event was set, and commit to finding other ways to support the movement for racial equity. I want to thank SAM Director Stephanie Stevich and Smithsonian Secretary Lonnie Bunch for their leadership in committing our institutions to this ongoing work. And with that, I will head into our program. So Nam June Paik is one of the most extraordinary and important artists of the 21st century. And our museum has a special relationship with him and his work. So I'm going to share my screen and some of the works that distinguish our holdings. So Nam June Paik, in many ways, in his globe-spanning, multimodal, media-embracing, and self-branding approach to art making, laid a blueprint for contemporary artists in the 21st century. Born in July 20th in 1932, Paik's life journey traversed Japanese-occupied Korea, post-Hiroshima, Japan, post-Division West Germany, before landing in 1964 New York, where he became a major force in American art, from performance, film and video, sculpture and installation, and through his influential philosophizing and writing about art and technology, which we'll really focus on today. Paik is so important to SAM's institutional identity, with his monumental electronic superhighway, continental US, Alaska, and Hawaii, an icon of our contemporary galleries since 2006. And with the 2009 arrival of the Nam June Paik Archive, making SAM the institution of record on Paik and a destination for scholars and students from around the world. This relationship, which began with acquisitions in the 1970s and 90s, has only grown over the years. And it continues with a current installation, John from the Archives, focused on Paik's early performances and collaborations, which we really hope to welcome you back to very soon. And so with that relationship in mind, we created an annual event to mark Paik's birthday each summer. And this year is no different, despite everything else being different. So it gives me great pleasure to be moderating this event and acknowledge it is not only a birthday party, but also a celebration of this book, recognizing the brilliant efforts of its three editors, John Hanhart, Greg Zinman, Edith Decker-Phillips, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. And it's also a chance to recognize the essential supporting role that SAM's staff played in making this publication possible by organizing and working with the Nam June Paik Archive. And I want to particularly thank Christine Hennessy, Hannah Pacius, Lynn Putney, and Claire Dennis for their dedicated work. It's also a reunion of sorts. Both John and Greg have histories at SAM that extend beyond this book. And so with that in mind, I'm going to now introduce them and their expansive work as quickly as I can. John Hanhart is a towering figure in the field of media art, having started in the film and video department at MoMA, and then establishing the film and media art collection at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, before returning to New York to head the Whitney's film and video department from the mid-70s to the 90s, when he took his curatorial vision to the New York Guggenheim. In 2006, we were honored that he joined SAM as the consulting senior curator with the express goal, supported by former SAM director Betsy Brune, of establishing a media art collection and programmatic strength here. His close relationship with Namjoon during the artist's career, and then with the estate after the artist's passing in 2006, was critical to the archive coming here and to the success of this 2012 retrospective that he curated for SAM, Namjoon Paik Global Visionary. And here, I'd also just like to thank the Paik Estate executor, Ken Hakuda, and curator John Huffman for their efforts around those two momentous events and their ongoing support as we continue to explore and showcase Paik's work and archive at SAM. Hanhart has continued to define and expand the media art field with recent ongoing projects, including serving as general editor of the Andy Warhol film catalog raisonné at the Whitney Museum of American Art, commissioning major new works as senior curator for media art at the University of Rochester Memorial Art Gallery, guest curating I Do Not Know What It Is I Am Like, The Art of Bill Viola in 2019, which followed in a 2015 book on that artist. And on the Paik front, in 2006, he curated and produced a catalog for Namjoon Paik, The Late Style at Gagosian Gallery in Hong Kong. And when this virus allows, he will be debuting a new Paik exhibition at Gagosian Gallery in New York, which I think we'll hear a little bit more about. And Greg Zinman is an associate professor in the School of Literature, Media, and Communications at the Georgia Institute of Technology. And after completing his PhD in cinema studies at NYU, he was a SAM postdoctoral fellow in our Research and Scholars Center, beginning in 2013. And while spending enormous time in the archives, which were recently then arrived, he really showed how much could be found there. And he found an unknown artwork, Etude 1, which is depicted here. And he's exemplary of the impact that the archive can have on scholars, but also that scholars working with the archive can have on our understanding of 20th century art. And so since then, he has written many pieces on film and media, appearing in The New Yorker, The Atlantic in October, among other publications. He has programmed film and media art at the Filmmakers Co-op, the Museum of the Moving Image, Asia Society New York, and the Ann Arbor Film Festival. He recently served as technical consultant for the 2019 movie Ad Astra, and is currently consulting on a documentary about the future of computing for IBM. In addition to co-editing We Are in Open Circuits, the book we'll be talking about today, Zinman is the author of Making Images Move, Handmade Cinema, and Other Arts, published by University of California Press at the beginning of this year. And so thank you so much for joining and for your extraordinary contributions to Paik scholarship and media art. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can get into a lively discussion. And to start, I wanted to ask, just sort of as a way of continuing introductions, if you could talk about what it was about Paik's work and what your first encounter with it was, and what it was that inspired you to be committed and then sort of stay committed over all these years to his legacy. Oh, John, you're muted. Can you unmute?
Sorry about that.
No problem.
So I just want to say that it's a great question, because when I was beginning my work at the Whitney Museum of American Art, I was looking to expand the program and bring video into the museum's exhibition program collections. And I would meet with artists, and I had heard about Namjoon Paik, but never really spent any time with him. Well, that changed. From the mid-70s onward, we became very close. I learned so much from him. You mentioned some of that in your introduction, Seisha, and that is that his art embraced, his ideas really announced and explored the full capacities of electronic moving image, and single channel, as television, as global telecast, as video walls, as sculpture, as performance. And it's all these modalities that he brought in and explored in his thinking and work. And it really was an inspiration. Just on a personal note, Namjoon was nonstop. He was a global artist. You mentioned that in his life. and he was always on. He was charismatic. I mean, he had an impact on the Rockefeller Foundation and on television stations. I mean, his brilliance, and I use the word genius because, and I don't use it lightly, because he really, his reading, his thinking processes, his knowledge, and what he could draw from really informed his art practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the book, there's so much in there that it's a little mind-blowing how much he's able to pack into each of those writings that were very off the cuff sometimes.
Yes, I think that he would think through writing. At the same time, he could create a memorandum for that would be fully outlining and describing in detail ideas, and so it's and that was always present with him. I was very fortunate to travel with him to Germany, to Asia, meet artists that were friends of his, and commission work at museums in addition to doing retrospectives. So it was the fact of his, I wish you could all meet him because he was so unusual and so electric, and as I said, so nonstop. But he was a dear friend. I was really privileged to spend many decades with him through his work, and also working with the estate. Yeah.
Greg, what got you first hooked?
Oh, that was easy. I had the good fortune of taking a class with John Hanhardt.
So it's a full circle. That's great.
And the thing that struck me about his work initially is I was a student of cinema first and foremost, and so I liked the textures and the look and the light of film. And I had always thought, because I hadn't studied it, I hadn't even encountered that much of it, that video was grainy and not appealing to my eye. Mm-hmm. And it was through studying with John and seeing Pake's work and seeing that use of color and the editing patterns, which seemed wildly contemporary to me and seemed to speak to a present moment in the way it still continues to. Mm-hmm. And that sort of opened my eyes to video art more broadly speaking. And so having that initial encounter, and it was a formalist encounter. I was like, oh, the pretty colors, the fast patterns, the breaking up the grid. Then, as John pointed out, finding out the breadth of his interests and the scope of his work and how readily he embraced other media and thought through things like painting and sculpture in a variety of platforms, from single channel work to multi-channel work to installation to video walls. And that just sort of continued to fire my imagination and my interest.
Well, great. That leads into my next question, which I think is maybe an obvious one, just knowing how long you have both engaged with his practice and thought about it. But I really am curious, when you worked on putting this book together, were there any surprises or things you feel like you learned or understood differently having done this deep dive with his writing?
Well, this whole project, I just like to say, began many years ago. Namjoon really wanted an English language edition of his writings. And his dream was to have it at MIT Press. And Roger Conover there, the editor, was very welcoming to the idea, but it was multiple years. And I would get things like this from Namjoon telling me to, Hanhardt, take a look at this, go to this page, see what has been written here. And these would appear, and we had later in life, we would have weekly lunches when he was in New York and Soho and near his Mercer Street loft, or in Miami Beach where he also lived. And he was constantly generating this idea of this book. And Edith Decker Phillips, who was really the person who produced one of the first German version, Show and Tell.
I love it.
And this was, and she did her dissertation on Namjoon Pike first, and her book. See, I'm doing promotion here.
Yeah, this is great. That book was so important.
Okay. Anyway, but she called her book Notes of a Cultural Nomad, culturellen nomad. And that's really what he was. And so all this is to say is that it began at a process. And then I wanted to bring in Ida's contacts in Germany toward the archives. And I wanted Greg's brilliance, because I consider him really the leading of a new generation of scholar. And he brings fresh ideas, fresh insights. And I knew he would, be able to see things and help assemble this through his perspective. And but there were definite discoveries. I mean, there's a text on formal development of pre-classical symphony, which demonstrates Prague's full capacity and knowledge in 1957 of classical music theory. And what's so interesting is then to see Suite for Transistor Radio from 1963, a few years later, when he was, where he had this score to interrupt a concert and the conductor by turning on your transistor radio and blasting the music into the symphony hall. So, this is, these connections and changes really became clear in researching and preparing this.
Well, I think we can get some of the flavor both of his thinking, but also of his practice through this platform. So one of the great things about being on Zoom is that we can share video. And so we talked about maybe actually sharing some of his artwork as well as alongside this conversation. And so Greg, you put together a selection of selections from his artwork. Can you tell me a little bit about what we're going to watch and why you picked those in particular?
Sure, thanks. We wanted to give everyone sort of a brief sense of Pake's formal and conceptual preoccupation. And this is just gathered from a handful of works. But some of the things that we're going to see include segments from Global Groove, his single channel masterpiece from 1973, which was broadcast on public television on WNET in New York. And that sort of can give you a sense of his expanding palette of the offerings for video art, and also his fondness for collaboration. We're going to see Charlotte Moorman, the cellist, a frequent collaborator of Pake's, and the poet Allen Ginsberg. And then the program also describes his dedication to racial, ethnic, and national representation, which I think is really important to highlight. We'll see a little bit from video film number 3, made with another frequent collaborator, Judd Yalkett, which illustrates Pake's engagement with politics and his belief that people could really take hold of the media and talk back to it and not just passively consume it. And then we'll see a little bit of Yalkett's silent film footage of Pake sort of at work in the making of Video Commune, Beatles from beginning to end. We'll see segments from Wrap Around the World, which is one of his 3 satellite broadcast extravaganzas from the 1980s, which called upon a dozen international stations to pull off, and again highlights this love of collaboration and chance and indeterminacy. We'll see a trans-Pacific duet between composer Ryuichi Sakamoto and dancer and choreographer Merce Cunningham. We'll see a little bit from Experiment with David Atwood, an important piece made at the end of the 1960s when Pake was a resident and artist in resident at WGBH Boston. And among its other myriad qualities, demonstrates his interest in the electronic materiality of the televisual image. We'll see him manipulate the image in real time, and also his interest in portraiture. What we'll be seeing is, I think John has ID'd the person in question as video artist Anthony Ramos, but we're not entirely sure. If anybody in the Q&A wants to chime in and tell us, that would be helpful. And then there's a little bit from Electronic Opera number 1, which is from a program that was the first public broadcast of video art in the United States in 1968 or 69. And it slyly demonstrates Pake's idea of participation TV, of becoming an active participant with the televisual medium. And we really hope you enjoy it.
Great. So we'll switch to video. We'll all watch it together, and then we'll come back and have some conversation to follow.
This is a glimpse of a video landscape of tomorrow, when you will be able to switch to any TV station on the earth. and TV guides will be as fat as the Manhattan telephone book.
Well, not just in music history and art history, I think that Pike made the first new cello since 1600. He made 3 TV sets in a plexiglass case. It's a totally new concept, and you should see how cellists feel about it. They're really upset. And it's a wonderful instrument, isn't it?
I think so.
Now, I do not make traditional cello sounds with it. I make TV cello sounds with it.
Sit down, please, gentlemen. Ladies. Ladies and gentlemen, since this is my first press conference since the inauguration, I can imagine there are a number of questions. Consequently, I shall make no opening statement and go directly to your questions. To your questions.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes, so far in the program, we really haven't addressed ourselves to the question of race in America, except in an oblique way. It seems at times to many people as if we are going backwards in this country to a more segregated system rather than one of real integration in this country. Would you give me your feelings about that as it relates to your responsibilities?
Well, obviously, from their vote, I would say that the jury is out. We have to demonstrate that we are concerned that we're going to carry forward the programs as we will. But I think we can do it in a candor, because there's nobody's kidding anybody. Political obligations here, and I think we need a new kind of candor in dealing with these problems. We've been kidding ourselves and overplaying and under-delivering for too long.
There are many people who believe that just as there's no cure for the serious diseases of the body, there really is no cure for some of the serious diseases of our body politic. Do you think all of your diseases, all of your ills are curable?
Yes.
You know, every time you make some progress, why, that progress creates some new problems. Well, you know, every time you make some progress, why, that progress creates some new problems.
And we're on.
Okay,
Tape is recording. Now we can see you in the shot.
I start from normal, yeah?
Now
Okay.
we see you in the shot, don't you?
All right.
Okay, there you go. We are recording anytime.
Recording now, yeah?
Yes, go. We got some music on, Harvey?
As the earth revolves, slipping through the passing days, men are wont to go astray, seeking newer games to play. From sun to rising sun, gentle people on the run, from the counting of their days, from the knowledge of their
Beijing, Bonn, County Kildare, Ireland, Jerusalem, Leningrad, London, Rio, Seoul, Tokyo, and New York, all on this live global broadcast Wrap Around the World, featuring live performances by David Bowie and La 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 Human Steps, and Ruichi Sakamoto, the Oscar-winning composer from The Last Emperor. We got acrobats from China, a punk rock band from West Germany, performance art from the Soviet Union, and we're tying up more communication satellites than any PBS broadcast in history. Hello, I'm Al Franken here with some earth-shaking news which should make this broadcast the most important in television history.
shook his crumbled wings, closed his eyes, moved his lips.
This is Participation TV. Please follow instruction.
Close your eyes.
That is to say, the indeterminacy or disorder, and on the other hand, determination and order are not truly opposed. It's like the Zen statement, every day is a beautiful day. Everything is pleasing, providing you haven't got the notion of pleasing and displeasing in you.
And if my illustrious speakers could come back. Thank you, Greg, for that extraordinary edit. It's a really nice blending of a lot of these works. And it reminded me, I just want to thank Electronic Arts Intermix as well, which is an outfit that distributes artist videos and gave us permission to share this incredible body of work in this format. And I also realized that we sort of jumped into this book, and I just want to clarify, the book that we're talking about is a series of, in a great number, unpublished writings by the artist. And so a lot of them are coming out of the archive. If you didn't have access to the archives, these are writings that maybe you wouldn't have known about before. And so it's really an opening up of what the broader field can know and read from Pak's own hand. And this video really reminded me and sort of emphasizes how much the artist's journey begins in music and moves through performance and then comes into this sort of painterly engagement with video and thinking about sculpture and installation. And so with the work on the book and the writings, can you talk about how his writings help us understand this journey that the artist had himself from music and performance into a more visual art landscape?
Well, I think that's very important is that the range of writings in here and the depth that one goes into in terms of Namjoon's work with performance and music at the beginning, your point, is that you can really trace out as you go through the book how important that notion of interactivity was there, the idea of interacting as performance, as a real-time event. And his scores describe that in some detail. And in his use of music, the idea of a random access, for example, where you could interact with the audio tape directly, is also expressed in his writings. I mean, the thing is that, as you just said, I just want to stress this, that the archive really is the source for this. This is going to transform both Pike studies and the studies of late 20th century art because of this. And I remember when I first saw this material, before it came to Smithsonian, it was mind-blowing. It felt like you were going inside Pike's brain and really finding everything that he was processing and working with. So I'm not going to chart out a specific map.
No.
I want people to really discover it. And the book is so designed so that it's very easy to have access.
Random access.
As well, exactly.
Yeah, and that emphasizes something. So I just want to show how thick the book is too. That's like, just can give you a sense, right? I had the pleasure of doing research in the archive and also writing on Pak's work. And one of the things that really struck me was the kind of contrast between a very sort of narrow set of information that's often repeated over and over again about his work and his philosophy. One phrase that always comes up is his plan to humanize technology, which is, something he said at one time in relation to some work. And I'm curious if there are pithy phrases or specific writings that you think will really shift or change people's understanding, or for the future scholars, what you think they'll pick up on in this book.
I wanted to let Greg pick up on it, but I just want to say one thing is that that notion of humanizing, you have to remember when through the 70s, 80s, and so forth, the notion of being directed by technology, the idea of being able to be empowered by it, and as Pike made his own tools and and created the remote control robot, these were extending his idea of disrupting communication to further communication. Yeah. And it humanized seemed to be a powerful way to make it seem somehow attainable, and it was that. And your point is well made, is that there are other, obviously, and all those Pike robots I mean,
yeah,
everybody.
I mean, just he had a more complicated relationship to technology, and the layering and the sort of complexity really come out in a lot of the writings. And that's so infrequently what's sort of brought up again and again in sort of shorter journalistic pieces. Greg?
Right.
I think it's a great point. I think Paik is sometimes maybe unfairly characterized as being sort of Pollyanna-ish about technology. And there's a phrase in a piece in the book called Rendezvous Celeste, which he wrote and rewrote continuously in 1984, 86, and 88, reflecting on his satellite pieces and sort of looking ahead to the possibilities that might be afforded us by the internet. And he ends the essay by saying, high tech is not a panacea. It's just a local anesthetic. There will be many unforeseen problems ahead. And that just awareness that technology wasn't going to solve all of our problems, but that we had to be aware of how it was being used. And I think, all of the promise of his satellite works, which he thought would revolutionize communication, satellites sort of developed along the same lines as the internet at the same time. But we know that just as with the internet, satellites are controlled by powerful forces, by state agencies and by very large corporate broadcasters. And so it's very hard to just step outside of the many uses and formations of technology. And I think Paik was just much more aware of that than he's often given credit for.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree. One of the reasons why I think about that humanized technology phrase is it's first used when he's making something called TV bra, which is small cathode ray tubes that will go on a woman's body. And that's a moment when you're humanizing technology. You're turning it into clothing, you're putting it on the body. And as he goes along and he's making these very large, monumental, 1,000 CRT sculptures, I think, whether he's humanizing technology or panacea getting us used to like what it is going to feel like to be bombarded by screens or have that wrap around you in some way, I think his approach to technology evolves and changes, as Greg is saying too. And in going back through some of the writings, I was really struck. There's so many moments when he's sort of predicting something that is right spot on, and then his evaluation of what it's going to produce is not, right? So that we're going to have two-way telecommunication and it's going to stop business travel. But in fact, it was only the coronavirus and this pandemic that has really gotten us to rethink sort of how much we want to use these technologies too. And so I'm already seeing questions coming up from the Q&A, and one of them is one that I already wanted to get to, and I think this is a perfect segue. So I'm going to bring it up now. And that is, what do you think Paik would make of our technological world today? Facebook, YouTube, Zoom, these distribution channels, the fact that we're having this program in this particular format, etc.
I mean, I have to say, it just fulfills if you go back to his expanded education for a paperless society, where he was talking about how media could change education, issues that we're talking about today. And he talked about philosophy could be really taught through this, through video, to the media planning for a post-industrial age, which included his electronic superhighway, coining that in 1974. So these two texts, 68 and 74, really capture this idea. But he was always, and this is from spending time with him and seeing, he was always picking up on different technology, fax, or this as different ways to communicate and to bring that into his studio. That was part of what Greg was talking about, that collaborative process was also to enable him to get into studios, to bring those studios and resources into his art making, into his own studio. So this was all setting himself into play to imagine what media could be. And I know that he would be on the internet. I mean, all of this is speaking to what he imagined. Flat TVs, video art, and homes. And it didn't always fulfill, like you said. I mean, in Global Grooves, he talks about TV Guide being as thick as the Manhattan telephone directory. We don't have a telephone directory, and we don't have TV Guide. But we do have the possibility of being able to intervene and expand and deploy the moving image in a variety of ways, as we are today, that can be enabled by artists.
I would just add to that, one thing, when we were researching the book, I came across an interview that Paik did in 1980. And he has this quote where he says, "Well, I thought chaos would be great interactive TV. So the problem is how to create electronic chaos so that we can enjoy each other." And, on the one hand, Zoom does, I think, and the coronavirus, the pandemic, everything that's been going on has given us these opportunities to reach out to people who maybe we haven't spoken with in a long time. And I think there's something very positive about that and reconnecting through this medium. On the other hand, I'm here to advocate for chaos. I don't think there's enough playfulness with the form. I don't think there's enough creative use of it. And you kind of want to see some ways of, one of the things that Paik always did so brilliantly is he rethought whatever technology he was working with. He took away from its putative use and reused it in some way, or opened it up and rewired things to produce different kinds of unforeseen results. And I'm looking for that from Zoom right now.
That's so true. I've been thinking that as well. Where's the great Zoom artists of our day? And also that's sort of the follow-on question. And I think, John, you want to jump in here, but what do we think he would have done with this medium? It has similar potential maybe to the satellite broadcast, but has its own affordances.
Namjoon was not led by the technology or the programs. He formulated them himself. And the notion of playfulness, lack of, was a way that he could invite people in. He was really interested in people coming and experiencing his work. But the notion of this kind of let things happen in a way, explore, don't just be accepting what the technology can deliver, the program that you can download and work with. How can you resist and create another kind of poetics of the moving image? I love the guy.
Yeah.
He was great.
That's a great point. And there's another question from our audience, which is sort of, what was his relationship with popular culture and in terms of connecting with high art? And I think that's a great question. And it's also a question that we're thinking about, through this medium too, sort of, how do you process?
Well, I'll start a bit, because Greg can go on because of the music, but popular culture in terms of music, from Mitch Ryder, Detroit Wheels, to James Bowie. He loved working with different artists out of popular culture, because he saw that he could bring that in, that soundtrack could bring people into his imagery, and he could playfully interact with it. And so in terms of music, as though he came from the avant-garde of Stockhausen and Cage, he was wedded to all forms of popular music. And this is where he would be really keen on what's happening.
Yeah, I think we saw some of that in the video, toggling between avant-garde music and David Bowie, right? That's how you bring the kids in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was so open to attracting viewers to video art and not feeling that these divisions between high and low needed to exist. And he was kind of ahead of the curve on some of that. He, at the same time that John was putting together the first one-person video artist show at the Whitney, which was Paik's show in 1982, landmark show, Paik would also be showing up at Danceteria, a club in New York City, to both do fundraisers for Charlotte Moorman's medical bills, but also to commune with the other video artists who were programming in the video lounge there. So he was able to move between all of these different worlds and milieus so easily, and was so embraced by everyone in every part of culture. It's really kind of remarkable.
That's absolutely true. And I think, one of the points he has in Random Access is that there's this challenge because video art is so long, and it made me think, what would he make of TikTok? 10-second video limits and complete access in that way, where you can sort of Google and pull it up. And I do think that he'd be finding these sort of playful affordances, but also, one of you said that he's thinking about this as not a panacea, but a moment of inoculation. And that's very close to Marshall McLuhan's point too. There's always this misreading of that too as very positivistic, but in fact, it's sort of a preparation for a world in which you're going to be surrounded by screens, you're going to have all this bombardment. So what are you creatively and critically going to do with those things? We have another question, a question from somebody I think who might have some insight into what's coming up next. So I'm going to ask you both. There's always, I think there's been a real resurgence in terms of interest in PAC. Not that it ever goes away, but there's this book, there's some upcoming exhibitions, and you're writing. And so if you can tell us about sort of what's on the horizon, but this question from Ken Hokuda in particular for John is, can you tell us about what role the PAC Berlin wall pieces will play in the New York Gagosian show, which is coming up? So we'll go over to John and then to Greg.
What was the question again? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Oh, what role will the Berlin wall pieces play? And so it's somebody who knows a little bit about what's coming up. Ken's got some ideas.
I can't wait for this show to come, to be actually going for you.
I can't either.
Now, but we're showing Nam June's painting onto fragments of the Berlin Wall. They're going to be shipped to the Gagosian Gallery in New York, and it will be seen along with Beuys' projection, Beuys and Nam June's performance in Tokyo in the 80s. I was fortunate to be there. It was an extraordinary event, and it became this video and then a projection. And so it takes us to Nam June and Berlin and Germany, and those friendships again. Those friendships, don't forget those friendships that keep animating him in his exploration. We're also going to have candle projection and some of his robots, and work that's never been seen before in New York, work that hasn't been seen outside of the estate. And the title of the show is Nam June Paik, Art in Process. And my idea here was to draw out this idea, which we've been alluding to, of art in process, a process of making that we will see across his career in a selection of work on view in the galleries. Thanks for the question, Ken.
That's so exciting. So we have so this is just a to be decided, to be determined show.
It's just waiting to be scheduled.
Okay, we can't wait.
Well,
and Greg, what do you have coming up?
Paik-wise, I'm fortunate enough to have an essay on Paik's collaborative labor and the satellite pieces and how they kind of provided a generative spark for his later installation work. And that's going to be in a book called Object, Event, Performance, Art, Materiality, and Continuity Since the 1960s, which is edited by Hannah Holing, who herself published a wonderful book, Paik's Virtual Archive, in 2017. So I'm really happy to be included in that. And I have a short exhibition catalog essay called Paik's Media Koans for a forthcoming show at the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Korea for a show that'll be in, I think it now has been pushed to 2021, called Nam June Paik's Legacy.
Great. And I wanted to pick up on the Berlin Wall, John, because I think one of the things that's interesting is I think this is a moment with this book that people can really get into the politics that is sort of, I think, sometimes missed in the playfulness and the technology focus. But, he goes to the Berlin Wall and performs with Charlotte, playing John F. Kennedy's speeches. And so there's a real sense of him as a Cold War artist that I think can come through with resources to more writing and more being able to pull that in. And I didn't know about these Berlin Wall pieces. So it's really exciting to think about sort of seeing that longer legacy of his engagement with the Berlin Wall and this question of sort of artistic and individual freedom.
Yeah, you also,
so very excited.
I was going to say his notion of communication, of broadcast, and how that overthrew the systems on the other side. So he was very much engaged in these issues, and to actually see the materiality of the actual Berlin Wall in the gallery, along with these projections, pretty fantastic.
So there's a great question here that I want to go to that asks, can we just speak a little bit more about disrupting communication in order to facilitate communication? Because I think that is a very, unusual take on these things, but I think comes to the heart of a lot of what he's doing.
Greg, do you want to begin at this time?
Sure. I mean, I think, if television was, even if it wasn't designed to be as such, it became a medium that was a relationship between a broadcaster and a receiver, and that you are simply supposed to consume. You consume the media, you take on the messages, and there's no way to talk back. And one of the things that Paik wanted to do was show us, and you can see this in things like videotape study number 3. At one point, not maybe in the clip that we had today, but there's a point where he's actually, you see his hand come into the frame, and he's manipulating reel-to-reel tape in order to play with the image. And when you see him twist the figure of Richard Nixon with a magnet, all of a sudden you get a sense of disrupting hierarchies, and that he was saying, look, you can do this too. It's a very sort of populist and democratizing idea of, you can take a hold of media. You don't have to just take what's given to you. You can speak back to it. And he was so adamant about that. And that's true also in early gallery pieces that were also called participation TV, where you could speak into a microphone and create beautiful abstractions on the screen, because he had rewired the audio and video signals, or TV Crown, where you could manipulate the dials and create abstractions. And so it didn't have to be just the artist who was doing this. It could be anybody. So there's kind of a real liberating, or an idea of a liberatory media ecology, where anybody could put their hands on something and speak back to the powers that be.
And I think, he talks about corporate structures, in some way he elides it because he's relying on it for funding, and the Rockefeller Foundation supports his research. But there is a sense that he's aware that in the majority of cases, communication is being instrumentalized. It's used for a corporate or capitalist purpose, and the disruption of the assumption that it always needs to be used that way, I think, is also critical and something we can learn from. John,
there's a really interesting genealogy to this whole thing in terms of Brecht's treatment of radio that Paik is picking up. And if you go to a 1963 show at the Gallery Parnasse, where the television screen is turned over on face down on the floor, or the manipulation of the television received broadcast image with tape is actually happening then, and is allied to his transformation of musical instruments. Because again, the notion of the piano being the centerpiece of the bourgeois German home, and then breaking it apart, was being replaced by the television, and he wanted to break that apart. So he was, but again, all this enabling of disruption, transformation, as Greg very well put it, is an enabling for the individual, the viewer, the new activist with the medium. And that was his great hope with cable television.
Yeah, well, there's another great question from the audience, and I think this is a good place to maybe sort of close out. Considering Paik's prescience about technology and stature in the art world, why do you think he's so little known to the American public today? Outside of the art world, most people don't know who he is. Though I would say also, sort of outside of the art world, most people don't know artists. Sort of, how do you think he should be better known?
Well, he should be, his work, it's interesting because his work has the whole history of his reception of his work has been of it being placed in the public sphere. He did an outdoor park piece in Philadelphia. He has public sculptures that are outside. And a lot of people have seen his work, but don't know it. And certainly his influence as it was co-opted into commercials and into television and so forth, his intervention into the Tonight Show, Charlotte Moorman's performances. I mean, she did these great public avant-garde events in New York City over the years. And all of these were enabling this, what we then called the avant-garde, into places where people could see and receive it. And I think that his influence is such that you see his work without necessarily knowing it's his. And well, you know, the pieces that are in Korea are gigantic and they're seen by thousands of people. So
right, he's a superstar in Korea.
Of the artists who work in media and have been in the museums, his work is certainly among the most actively received.
Yeah, and you want to know what? I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to use a kind of straightforward question to ask another question about sort of cultural reception and how that affected his work. And so an audience member has noticed that we each pronounce his last name slightly differently. And we talked about this sort of at the beginning. So the question seems simple, how do you pronounce his last name? But there's a few different approaches to that. So we can sort of each answer for ourselves. But I want to tag on to that, this question is sort of, how do you think being part of a wave of Asian immigration and an early Asian American in a moment when that wasn't as common, affected how he worked in the world and how he sort of positioned himself?
Well, first of all, I pronounce his name Nam June Paik. Nam June Paik. I've said this to him, and for all of our 30, 40 years of working together, and it's always the question. This question is always asked, and he never imposed the pronunciation. I think he enjoyed everybody pronouncing it in different ways. That said, Paik's figure, his person, coming to Germany in the avant-garde, this singular figure, Asian, then going to New York, gaining the interests of a number of very powerful resources, always holding his own. It's amazing. I mean, and it was because he was so charismatic and brilliant. I mean, people could get that, and at the same time, he was being so disruptive when he would smash things and do things that people didn't know what to make of it. And that allowed him to get in and begin to do his thing and his work. It's an amazing story. If the biography is written, it'll be one of the most interesting aspects, is how he moved globally, because he was a global artist.
Yeah. Greg,
I just want to add to that, you know, I think in encountering his work, I had so often read that he was funny, and he had a great sense of humor. Obviously, he was ingratiating and witty, and that he was a prankster, that his methods were chaotic. And I think there's something going on there, especially in the West and in the United States, because he spoke in this aphoristic, broken English, that people did treat him in a certain way. And I think one of the things that the book does, I hope, is show just how methodical and deliberate he was in his thinking. Because you can see in the book him crossing out and rewriting sections and rewriting, renumbering, reordering. And it just shows that it wasn't off the cuff. No. It wasn't just pouring stuff out. He went back over things again and again and again, and was a much more careful and deliberate thinker than I think he's been credited for being.
I think that's absolutely right. And also he's positioning himself culturally throughout the book and throughout his writings in this translation role, in this role of bringing knowledge in both directions of philosophies and important thinkers in thinking about the East and West. But I also think this prankster role, you know, sort of allowed him to bring forward some things about what it meant to be othered or sort of seen as an anomaly. And I think the edit you put together also brings out that throughout the writing, you can see him also thinking about race relations in a very careful way early on, because I think he was feeling the conflicts within American society and how that plays out too. So I think this is going to contribute enormously to deepening and complicating and nuancing so much of what we know about him and what we can learn from him. John, we're coming at the end of time. Did you have something you needed to say before we close?
So I just wanted to say how he's so much a multifaceted figure that people saw on each facet another part of him, and I'm really thrilled with this and look forward to more conversations with your audience.
Wonderful. Well, we are thrilled. We're so glad you could all join. That's participants and speakers alike. Please look out for the recording, which will be posted on our website and YouTube. When things open back up, please come to the galleries and see the actual real material from the archive that helps tell this story. As I said, we're telling the story of his performance work right now. We can tell millions of stories through that archive, but also you can get the book and get a preview from your home while it's safe to do that. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.